All right, hello. Wanted to hop on here and talk a little about honey and products of the hive. We're going to talk about nutritional benefits, medicinal properties, as well as kind of ethical sourcing. And in this conversation I wanted to have to share is spurred on by two things. So number one was received a message, a question about ethical sourcing of honey. So we're going to talk about that, we're going to address that, as well as I've got a class coming up on November 29th all about mead making using products of the hive, the honey, the propolis, the pollen, the royal jelly. And I always do a little bit of research before a class. I'm kind of well versed within the superfoods of the hive. And it's been on my mind, and wanted to dive in and share. So if you get any comments, any questions about honey or anything related, just post it down below. Let's first start off with what are the foods coming from the hive. So of course we have honey, the thing that we all know and love, one of the greatest, most natural and nutritious medicinal sweeteners. Honey gathered from the nectar of flowers. The bees, they gather that, they bring it back to the hive, mix it with their own spit enzymes, and fan it down to the exact moisture water percentage, and we have what we know of as honey. So incredible. It is neat, I believe, personally, nature's perfect sweetener, most natural sweetener. It's the only concentrated source of sugar that exists in nature as is, right? Fruits, a lot of fruits that are higher in sugar, those came later, and as a result of hybridizing. When we talk, in particular, if we get into creating certain alcoholic beverages where you actually need a sugar source, of course, fruits like I talked about, but things like grains, again, came later. That was kind of through domestication, which was through civilization, and then later kind of hybridizing, right? Selecting qualities, traits, generation after generation, we got into fruits and grains to be able to extract sugars from them for fermenting. Whereas honey, it's kind of the most natural, most available as is. Other foods coming from the hive, we have the bee pollen, right? So this is literally flower pollen gathered by the bees. They've got little pollen sacs on their legs. They pack that in, bring it back to the hive again, mix it with a little bit of honey, a little bit of spit, their own enzymes, and turn it into what we call bee pollen. This is one of the most complete foods on the planet, nutritionally, full of amino acids, full of B vitamins, all kinds of other vitamins, minerals, antioxidants, an incredible food and an absolute energy food. All these foods in the hive, right, are actually very energizing. Other food we have from the hive is something called propolis. Now, propolis is gathered from the resins of trees. Now, I'm really into a wild food or medicine called the balm of Gilead, which is gathered from the poplar buds, and it's that sticky resinous substance essentially that coats the leaf and protects it through the winter. So the trees, they'll put out their new leaves for next year. They're already out there, right? So it was the end of last summer into the fall. They've got those leaves, and they have a sticky resinous coating that protects them through the winter. Now, there's a very strong connection between that resinous substance, which is then turned into the medicine known as balm of Gilead, and propolis. So it's that resins, the saps from trees that the bees are going around collecting. That is what we know as propolis, and that's the first line of defense for the immune system of the hive. And if anyone's ever been a beekeeper or seen a beekeeper work, oftentimes when you go to lift the lid on a hive, whether it's the Langstroth, which are those kind of white boxes you'll see in a field, or a top bar hive, which are more natural forms of beekeeping that is meant to more mimic like a log. Oftentimes when you first open that up, you gotta sometimes use a tool to crack into that, because the bees, they've sealed it up, almost they've glued it shut, and the substance they're using is called propolis. And like I mentioned, it's the first line of defense for the immune system of the hive. They're trying to seal it off, and this propolis has very strong antimicrobial properties, antibacterial, antiviral, and as such, humans can use that and benefit from that. Another kind of food element from the hive is called royal jelly. Now, royal jelly is literally a glandular secretion that is fed to the young bees, so in their kind of nursing stage, as well as to the queen bee. Now, this is an interesting thing where it's literally nurture over nature. So all bees are born created equal, the females anyways. There's definitely a difference between the males and the females if you get into it. And a queen bee is selected from the females, and then she's fed a diet exclusively of royal jelly. And that is what gives her basically her superpower. She's able to outlive any other bee by a multiple factor, whereas the average kind of worker bee will live a few weeks. She can live up to 2 years, and she has more offspring than any other being on the planet, and it's due to that diet of the royal jelly. So incredible properties to that, and humans have been utilizing that, right? And there's been that, I believe, there can be a good kind of give and take relationship. The beekeeper. I was a beekeeper for a couple of years myself. Had bees in the backyard here in Calgary, down in Bowness for a number of years, until the flood. We had them for about 3 years, and then the flood came. We were living on the river at that time, and so the home of the bees got swept away. The bees, they flew. They knew it was coming, so they flew away. But they just didn't have a home to come back to. And where I'm living at now, it hasn't quite worked. But anyways, my relationship with bees goes deep and been for a long time. I have a lot of respect for bees. Now, the question that came up regarding kind of the ethical nature, is it possible to ethically source and consume honey? Can it be made? This woman is vegan, as I was for a number of years. I never went as far as no bee products when I was vegetarian and vegan. And so I think, like anything, my motivations for being a vegetarian, someone's motivations for not consuming bee products, totally get it. And there's a lot of kind of nobleness in there, but I think what we need to understand is this idea that really the issues that we have in raising livestock or in keeping bees is when we go to this industrial scale, right? When we go to industrial scale, then it's not a good relationship, right? We begin to compromise on the level and the quality of care that is provided for the animal that we're caring for, and corners are cut, and that quality begins to go down. So with honey products, bee products, you want to look for kind of small scale and people that have those kind of ethics, and oftentimes a local, even inner city beekeeper is a great choice. That would be a good one for someone to source out, right? Because there's someone just like me, right? They just have 1 or 2 hives, and maybe they're part of a co-op or collective where all their honey gets put into this kind of pot, literally, where then it gets made as a local product. And there's a lot of relevance. There's a great relationship there between bees and beekeeper. Next level up, for instance, where we get our honey from. So even though we label it, obviously we're not producing it ourselves. We've got a beekeeper out on Vancouver Island. He is a 3rd generation beekeeper who lives, his house, get this, is in the shape of a hexagon. Like he lives in a beehive in that sense. And wonderful man. So we've done our research, and we wanted to work with someone who produces a volume, right? So he doesn't just have 2 hives in his backyard. This guy's managing hundreds and hundreds of hives, but he's doing so in such a reverent way, such an ethical way. And bees, the matter of the fact is they do produce a surplus of honey, and there's a way to kind of work with them, how you set up the hives, etc., where you're then able to take that surplus. And here's where kind of the main distinction I feel would happen is whether or not that beekeeper's taking all the honey or just taking that excess and then leaving some for the bees. Now, there's absolutely some beekeepers who literally take the excess and it all and leave nothing for the bees. So the bees, there's that phrase, busy as bees, right? They're out collecting the nectar while it's available. They know they have that winter to go through. They know they have young to rear, so they're collecting this excess amount, and they'll just keep going. They'll just keep filling, building comb, filling it with honey for that later time, and they'll eventually come back to it. And so we want to leave enough for them to make it through the winter. I have met beekeepers literally who are like, yeah, nope, we take it all and then we just feed them back sugar. We feed them back high fructose corn syrup. That's the kind of thing that we don't want, and it's the kind of thing that's like, well, no wonder the bees are having trouble, right? It's like if we're taking their super nutritious medicinal food that they've produced for themselves and we're feeding them back sugar or feeding them back worse, high fructose corn syrup, right? We know what that does to our immune systems. What is that going to do for the bees? Another little interesting insight around kind of, again, ethicalness and bees. So someone might choose not to consume honey, but we are so intimately connected, or the bee is so intimately connected to our food system. So whether you consume honey or not, the fact that you consume blueberries, the fact that you consume almonds, any of these crops, of which I can't remember the statistic, but I mean, it's probably a good half of the food that's on our plates. The bees are directly responsible for the pollination. So there's this whole industry, potentially even bigger than honey sales itself, is pollination. And I spoke to one of these, massive, large-scale beekeepers in the industry of pollination. And so his main job literally is to take, hundreds of hives to these industrial farms that are literally massive monocrops of blueberries or almonds or whatever the case is. Plop the bees down during that time of the year where that particular crop is in flower, and the bees go ahead, do their thing, pollinating and allowing for a successful crop. And this guy, again, he's in it for the money, he's in it for the business, huge, massive scale. He was almost bragging the fact that he had to spend $25,000. He bought high fructose corn syrup from Coca-Cola to feed his bees, because that's what he's in. And it was to get them going in the spring. Here's this big dose of sugar, and get out to the fields and work, kind of thing. And so that is so prevalent. And again, I get and honor the choice to kind of have a more respectful relationship with the creatures that help provide our food, but this is often a missing piece, a missing part that we don't think about, that bees are used in pollination of crops. And how do we get around that? Again, it's about going back to small scale. The reason we need those bees in there is because it's these industrial wastelands we call farms, where it's literally one crop, acre after acre after acre after acre. It's not a biodiverse ecosystem where bees would naturally be there, or it's not a regenerative agriculture farm or a permaculture system where we'd have bees as integrated into that, where they need to literally bring that as an outside source. And it's huge industry, both in Canada and the US. And I think, again, is one of those reasons why we have such issues with bee populations, right? We're not treating them well. So anyways, go smaller scale if you can. Find out the source, find out the story. Another interesting point, our honey is from BC, and I often get the question like, oh, do you have any local honey? Do you have anything from Alberta? And one of the reasons we don't is that in Alberta, there's so much industrial agriculture, like I'm talking about. In particular, a lot of canola, which can be GMO. And when a bee's going out and collecting that nectar, you can't say, keep over here and don't go over there. They've got a certain flying range, and a lot of Alberta honey, especially if it's quote unquote local from this area, could very likely have that cross-contamination from pollinating canola. So very conscious about the source of the honey, where we get it, and trying to make sure that that's as pure as possible. So anyways, hope you've enjoyed that. Just wanted to jump on, talk a little bit about bees and nutritional properties. We didn't even get into that. So let's go on with that. In fact, one of the reasons why this lady was consuming honey or considering it outside of her kind of vegan spectrum was to do with like colds, sore throats, right? So honey is one of the most healing medicinal substances, again, that naturally exists in nature, and it is actually very antimicrobial. And it can be used internally as well as externally. Honey, you might not know this, but it's actually fantastic for wound healing, whether it's like cuts or burns. And there's a lot going on there. So antimicrobial, anti-inflammatory, in fact. So inflammations, sore throats or redness on the skin can really help reduce that. As well as there's an enzyme, glucose oxidase, which is activated, which then releases hydrogen peroxide. And that has very healing kind of antimicrobial properties, especially as well when you put it on a wound. Honey is also has components that are hydrophilic and will draw, or hydroscopic, and it will draw moisture out of that. And what it ends up doing is kind of like desiccating that wound, so drying it out, so where other like bacteria, infections can't grow because they don't have that moisture. Honey as well is also quite acidic. It's about the same acidity as like a citrus fruit, like an orange or a grapefruit, which is about in the pH of 4, maybe sometimes 3, in that range. And most bacteria, if you're into fermentation, you know that a pH as low as that, bacteria, most of them, the bad ones, don't or cannot live in that pH. So that's another reason why honey is so healing and very medicinal. We've been talking a little bit about the propolis, so you can find that in a couple of different forms. Like I mentioned, it's that sticky resinous substance. And you can actually chew on it. It's like spruce pitch or pine resin, where if you're chewing on it, it can actually like get stuck in your teeth. And it turns out people have actually used this in that same way, where actually dental caries or cavities or abscesses. Modern times, obviously you want to check into their dentist, get that figured out. But at least in the meantime, using the propolis to kind of pack in there if you have some of that sticky resinous substance. Again, first line of defense of the immune system, very antiviral, antibacterial, antimicrobial, so it can help in that way. If you put it into a tincture, into alcohol, so this is bee propolis, this is Harmonic Arts that makes this, then it's very easy to take, just the back of the throat. So, colds, flus, especially little sore throats, really great that way, in that it has those antimicrobial properties. And you can also find it mixed with honey. So here's actually propolis honey, where it's honey and propolis mixed together. It's got an amazing flavor, incredible texture, and this is probably one of the best actually for sore throats, for the colds, first the onset as well as kind of all through it, especially even if you're feeling that kind of like that soreness, that hoarseness. Again, those anti-inflammatory, very soothing properties, antimicrobial properties, a little bit of spoonful of this or stir it into your tea. Absolutely fantastic. From a nutritional perspective, propolis contains all vitamins except vitamin K and all minerals except sulfur. Granted, in small kind of trace amounts, but amazing, right? Sometimes that's all we need from those minerals and from those vitamins, just small amounts. So from a nutritional perspective, is incredible as well. So anyways, that's all I got for you. Just wanted to jump on and chat honey. So hopefully that answered Lisa's question, who had messaged me. And if you want to go deep dive a little bit further into honey and how to create your own honey wine, medicinal, healing meads, I'll be doing that at Light Cellar here November 29th. That's the next one. If you're watching this after the fact, it's something I do every couple of months, so you might be interested in joining. You're going to learn to craft your own honey wine, take your own half-gallon home, and it's a good, fun, delicious skill to have. It's a great way to be able to incorporate the healing benefits of the hive into your life for the nutritional, medicinal benefits. So, hey, thanks for watching. Thanks to Danielle for the comment. Appreciate you guys, and give it a thumbs up, give it a share if you know someone who would also enjoy watching this. Enjoy your day.